Long before highways and concrete cities, the rainforest hummed with life, its canopy veiling secrets older than most civilizations. Beneath those green waves of mist and shadow lay the skeletal remains of stone temples and palaces. The Maya, masters of time and astronomy, once ruled these lands with cities that rivaled ancient Rome in scale. Today, as vines coil around the last visible ruins, the jungle whispers their stories. With each breeze and distant bird call, something lingers, echoes of the people who built celestial observatories without steel or beasts of burden, who mapped the stars with unmatched precision, and whose legacy still pulses beneath the soil. These forgotten cities are not mere relics, but living puzzles. Hidden under thick foliage, many of them were only rediscovered in the last century. The forest didn't just conceal them, it protected them. Nature became both their tomb and their cradle. Though time eroded walls and toppled altars, the soul of these places endures in silence. Roots crack through courtyards and moss carpets once glorious stairways, but traces of carved glyphs and sacred paths remain. The world moves on, yet here, in this eternal green, the past refuses to fade completely. The term lost cities evokes dramatic tales, but the truth is more subtle, more melancholic. These cities were abandoned, not erased. Some fell due to climate shifts, others to internal unrest or overpopulation. Yet their memory lived on in the songs and stories of the Maya descendants. When European explorers stumbled upon them centuries later, they saw ruins, mute and mysterious. But what they really found were messages carved in stone, waiting to be heard once more. Every broken stela, every ceremonial platform still speaks to those willing to listen. To walk among these ruins is to step outside of time. The scent of wet earth, the cry of unseen birds, the feel of ancient stone beneath your fingers, all combines into a sensory bridge to another world. These weren't just ceremonial sites. They were bustling centers of culture, trade, and innovation. Children played in courtyards. Scribes etched history into bark paper books, and smoke curled from sacred fires. The rainforest may have reclaimed the rooftops, but the city heart still beat, gently, like dreams stirring just before sleep. Tonight, as we begin this journey together, imagine yourself beneath that towering canopy. Let the sounds of dripping leaves and distant frogs lull you. Imagine a torchlight flickering beside a glyph-covered wall, or a priest lifting his gaze toward a constellation. This is not a tale of ruin. It is a lullaby of legacy. The Maya may have vanished from their stone cities, but their spirit, endlessly curious, deeply spiritual, and intricately connected to nature, remains woven into the very air of the forest. Thousands of years before cities like Tikal or Copan took shape, the ancestors of the Maya wandered the thick forests of Central America. These early settlers, arriving as early as 2000 BCE, were drawn by fertile soils, rivers, and the abundance of wildlife. They began as foragers and farmers, cultivating maize and domesticating beans and squash. Slowly, they shifted from temporary encampments to permanent villages. With each generation, they carved out space from the wild, clearing forests, building with limestone, and forming the first communal centers that would evolve into grand ceremonial cities. As time passed, social structures began to emerge. Villages grew into towns with designated leaders, craft specialists, and traders. Simple mounds became temples. The forest, once overwhelming, was now tamed in patches, woven into daily life. Early settlements like Nacbe and El Mirador began to rise in northern Guatemala, precursors to the mighty cities that would dominate the classic period. These first steps weren't hurried. They were thoughtful and methodical, with no metal tools or pack animals. Every stone place was a triumph of will and communal effort. Religion and cosmology also began to take root. The Maya believed in a layered universe. Earth, sky, and underworld, all interconnected by sacred trees. Their world was not just physical, but spiritual. Every construction, every ritual mirrored the cosmos. Even in these early days, there were sacred fires and chants to gods of rain, maize, and creation. Communities were anchored not only by leadership or defense, but by shared reverence for the divine. Over time, the spiritual bond between land and people became unbreakable. Trade also played a role in growth. Obsidian from the highlands, jade from distant rivers, and salt from the coast all moved between communities. Canoes glided silently through jungle rivers, linking the inland with the ocean. Through these routes came not only goods but ideas, architecture, astronomy, and myths traveled with the merchants. These exchanges laid the foundation for shared culture across vast regions, uniting people who might never meet under the same sky stories and calendar systems. In these early centuries, the Maya became more than just survivors. They became dreamers. They watched the stars from open fields and marked the cycles of Venus. They mapped the passing of seasons, not just for farming, but for the sacred. These first footsteps in the rainforest would echo through millennia, shaping an empire that rose not by accident, but by vision, patience, and deep harmony with the land. Even now, their journey feels present, just beneath the moss and soil. With the rainforest as their backdrop and the stars as their guide, the Maya began shaping a civilization around a concept of time. By 1000 BCE, they were already developing one of the most sophisticated calendar systems in human history. Their long count calendar, capable of tracking dates over millennia, was not just a tool, it was a philosophy. Time, to the Maya, moved in cycles. Events repeated with spiritual significance, and every day held unique energy and meaning. Kings were born under certain auspicious days. Wars were declared in harmony with celestial events, and rituals were performed when the cosmos called for balance. Alongside their growing understanding of time, a new figure emerged, the divine king or Kilhula-Jaw. These rulers weren't mere administrators. They were seen as mediators between the gods and the people. Their legitimacy often hinged on celestial alignments at birth or during ascension. Kings commissioned grand monuments to record their reigns, victories, and rituals, encoded in hieroglyphic writing. Their power wasn't just political, it was cosmological. They were living symbols of order and prosperity, embodiments of the calendar itself. A king's failure, therefore, was not personal. It was a cosmic imbalance that needed correcting through ritual. To understand the scale of their temporal mastery, one must look to the city monuments. Steely, tall stone slabs were carved to commemorate specific dates in history, each tied to events of ritual or power. Some cities even aligned their pyramids with solstices and planetary movements, making them both sacred spaces and observatories. Unlike other ancient civilizations who feared the unpredictability of the sky, the Maya embraced its cycles. Their calendar systems, Sokin, Hab, and the long count, interwove myth, math, and astronomy with stunning elegance. The most astounding part? Much of this knowledge developed without telescopes or modern tools. The Maya observed the heavens with the naked eye, charting the movements of Venus, eclipses, and equinoxes with astonishing accuracy. Some modern scholars have compared their astronomical knowledge to that of ancient Babylonians or Greeks. But for the Maya, the cosmos was not just science. It was storytelling. The path of a star was a journey of a god, an eclipse, a battle in the heavens. Time itself was alive, and every tick of the calendar heart had meaning. In these ancient cities, kings and calendar keepers walked together, one ruling the earth, the other reading the sky. Their partnership defined Maya civilization for centuries. It's humbling to think that beneath today's rainforest floor lies not only stone but time itself, still coded in glyphs awaiting translation. The jungle may have muted their voices, but it could never silence the ticking of the Maya's cosmic clock. As the Maya's mastery of time and ritual deepened, so did their ambition to reshape the land itself. Across vast stretches of rainforest, cities began to rise, not in isolation, but as part of a grand network of urban centers. Without metal tools to wheel or beasts of burden, the Maya carved, hauled, and stacked immense limestone blocks into towering pyramids, sprawling palace complexes, and ceremonial plazas. Their cities weren't chaotic clusters, but carefully planned environments. Roads called Sakbiab connected key buildings, and each structure was aligned with celestial events. Architecture became a sacred expression, monuments not only to power but to the cosmos itself. Among the most iconic structures were the step pyramids. Often capped with temples, these pyramids served as spiritual beacons, places where the earth met the sky. Priests would ascend the narrow steps, their silhouettes framed by sunrise or moonlight, to conduct rituals and offerings. These performances weren't just for the gods. They were public affirmations of balance and divine favor. Even today, some of these pyramids remain miraculously intact, defiant against centuries of encroaching jungle. Their design wasn't just functional. It was symbolic, replicating the sacred mountain in creation in Maya mythology. Despite the harsh tropical environment, the Maya adapted with remarkable ingenuity. Cities were often built atop elevated platforms to avoid flooding, and sophisticated drainage systems helped manage rainfall. Reservoirs and artificial ponds stored water, while constructed terraces and canals supported agriculture. Far from living in harmony by accident, the Maya engineered sustainability into their cities. Each stone, each pathway was laid with intention, not only to endure nature, but to honor it. The rainforest was a partner, not an enemy. City centers were vibrant. Markets bustled with traders selling obsidian tools, cacao, pottery, and vibrant feathers. Musicians played wooden flutes, while weavers spun cotton dyed with plant pigments. Children ran through courtyards, while elders told stories carved into stele. Every surface was painted. Every wall once gleamed in colors now lost time. Even ordinary homes, modest by comparison, were built with thatched roofs and aligned to solar paths. These weren't ghost towns waiting to be discovered. They were once living, breathing worlds of rhythm and color. Today, much of what survives are the bones of these cities, the stone cores of structures that once sparkled with paint, song, and fire. Yet even in silence, they speak volumes. One can still walk their ceremonial routes, touch their weathered stairways, and feel the precise alignment of their walls with sun and star. In doing so, you realize these cities were not built simply to last. They were built to remember. Deep in the lowlands of northern Guatemala, the jungle yields to something unexpected. Monumental ruins rising like stone waves through the canopy. This is Tikal, one of the most powerful and awe-inspiring Maya city-states to have ever existed. At its height during the Classic period, c. 200 to 900 CE, Tikal was home to tens of thousands and governed a far-reaching political and military network. Unlike many cities that grew modestly, Tikal soared with ambition. Its towering pyramids reached above the treetops, and its plazas echoed with the steps of kings, priests, and citizens alike. Even now, its majesty defies the silence imposed by time. Tikal wasn't just big, it was strategic. Located near essential trade routes, it became a hub for obsidian, jade, cacao, and knowledge. Its rulers formed alliances and waged wars, often immortalizing their victories on stele and temple walls. One of the most famous kings, Jasawchan Kuilai, led Tikal into a renaissance in the 8th century CE, defeating its rival Calakmul and erecting towering monuments to his legacy. Under his reign, architecture flourished, religious life intensified, and astronomy guided every civic action. Tikal was a city driven by visionaries who used both diplomacy and divine power to shape their world. The acoustics of Tikal's Grand Plaza were no accident. Engineers and priests understood how sound traveled across space. A single voice on the pyramid steps could carry clearly across the square, a vital function during public ceremonies or royal announcements. Rituals were not intimate affairs but community events. Bloodletting, dances, and offerings brought the city together in shared reverence and spectacle. Temples were not only architectural marvels, they were instruments of sound and spirit. Each echoed step carried meaning. Each sacred drumbeat traveled through generations. Despite its grandeur, Tikal was not invincible. Political instability, environmental stress, and external pressure began to weaken its hold. Over time, the jungle crept inward, first around the edges, then over homes, and finally into the very heart of the temples. Yet even in ruin, Tikal retained its dignity. When rediscovered centuries later, explorers were stunned by the sheer size and complexity of what lay hidden. Unlike myths of El Dorado, this was no illusion. It was proof that a powerful civilization once thrived in these forests. Today, Tikal stands as a bridge between past and present. Modern Maya communities visit to honor ancestors. Tourists walk its echoing plazas, unaware that every stone carries a story of ambition, faith, and resilience. As the wind rustles through saber trees and monkeys cry in the distance, the city breathes again, not in conquest, but in memory. Tikal is not merely a ruin. It is a voice still speaking, soft but unwavering, in the language of stone and sky. In a landscape where monsoon rains could flood fields and dry seasons could parch wells, the Maya became extraordinary environmental engineers. They adapted to the whims of the rainforest not by fleeing it, but by mastering it. Across the lowlands, they built raised fields and artificial terraces, harnessing both water and elevation to grow maize, squash, and beans. Channels and stone-lined canals redirected seasonal floods, while underground cisterns called chultans stored rainwater for droughts. Far from living at the mercy of nature, the Maya learned to anticipate it, bending it gently to their will. In cities like Calakmul and Caracol, massive reservoirs, some the size of modern swimming pools, collected rainwater during the wet season. These weren't just pits in the ground. They were engineered with layers of clay and stone to reduce seepage and contamination. Surrounding these reservoirs were sloped plazas that guided rainfall efficiently, a design that reflects both ingenuity and foresight. Water wasn't simply a necessity, it was sacred. Its management was often overseen by priests, and rituals were performed to honor Chak, the rain god, whenever the first drops fell. Their knowledge of soil and ecology extended deep into the rainforest itself. The Maya practiced agroforestry, intentionally cultivating useful trees like cacao, ramon, and avocado in managed groves. These forest gardens appeared wild but were carefully maintained. This blend of forest and field preserved biodiversity and provided food year-round, even when crops failed. They created what we now call anthropogenic forests, where human influence enhanced natural systems. The Maya didn't just live in a rainforest, they sculpted it into a life-sustaining mosaic. Even in city cores, the Maya balanced built environments with nature. Courtyards were often lined with trees, while temples rose amidst groves and gardens. Birds nested in palace eaves, and monkeys swung through plazas. The boundary between civilization and nature was blurred intentionally. This harmony reflected their worldview, that humans were not above nature, but part of a divine ecology. Each stone laid was done in the presence of the gods, and each harvest celebrated the earth's silent partnership in their survival. The genius of the Maya lies not only in their calendars or temples, but in their relationship with the land. Long before modern sustainability, they practiced balance, patience, and stewardship. Their cities weren't scars on a landscape, but extensions of it, rooted as much in spiritual wisdom as in practical need. Today, as we walk among their silent plazas, we can still see the outlines of fields, canals, and gardens, reminding us that true civilization is not just what we build, but how we live with what surrounds us. The Maya world pulsed with stories, etched in stone, painted on pottery, and whispered in sacred groves. At the center of this rich culture stood their gods and the glyphs that brought them to life. Maya writing was a symphony of over 800 distinct glyphs, blending logograms and syllables into poetic language. These glyphs adorn temples, stelae, and codices, chronicling battles, births, celestial events, and divine instructions. Unlike many ancient scripts lost to time, the Maya script survives through both artifact and living memory. It wasn't just language, it was sacred breath captured in stone. The Maya pantheon was vast and deeply interwoven with nature. Each god governed aspects of life: sun, maize, rain, death, and rebirth. They weren't distant or aloof, but ever-present forces in daily rituals and seasonal cycles. Some deities, like Itsamna, the creator, embodied wisdom and writing. Others, like Chak, wielded thunder and brought rains with his lightning axe. The hero twins of the Popol Vuh, the Maya creation myth, journeyed through the underworld, setting cosmic order through cleverness and sacrifice. Through myth, the Maya understood not just their place in the world, but the movements of the stars above and the earth below. Temples were designed as sacred spaces where humans could commune with the divine. Atop pyramids, priests burned copal incense and chanted glyph prayers passed down through generations. Bloodletting, an act of sacred self-sacrifice, was practiced by kings and nobles to open portals between worlds. The spilling of blood was not seen as brutality, but as nourishment for the gods. These acts reinforced harmony between the human and cosmic realms, and the glyphs that recorded them served both as memory and offering, ensuring that the gods remembered their people. Beyond temples, glyphs appeared on painted ceramics and bark paper codices. These fragile books, folded accordion style, contained astronomical data, ritual calendars, and medicinal knowledge. Few survive today, due in part to Spanish efforts to destroy pagan texts, but the ones that do, like the Dresden Codex, offer glimpses into a world where writing was magic. Scribes, often noble and deeply trained, held high status. With brush and pigment, they encoded the will of the gods and the rhythm of the universe, preserving it for future generations who might one day remember. Though many glyphs were long unreadable, modern scholars and indigenous communities have worked together to resurrect their meanings. Each deciphered glyph brings a Maya world into sharper focus, a world where stories shaped cities and gods walked among the trees. To learn their writing is to step into their dreams. And somewhere in the jungle, where stone glyphs still rest in silence, a prayer waits to be heard once more. In the heart of Maya society, where myth and daily life intertwined, a game echoed across cities, a sacred contest played on stone courts, known as Paktapak or the Mesoamerican ball game. Far more than a sport, it was a ritual woven into cycles of life, death, and divine order. Teams clad in padded gear struck a heavy rubber ball, using hips, thighs, and elbows, attempting to pass it through stone hoops mounted high on the court walls. The game symbolized cosmic battles, day against night, order against chaos. Every point scored was an echo of celestial drama. The ball itself represented the sun, and the movement across the court mimicked the sun's passage through the underworld each night. The stakes were often steep, especially in ceremonial matches involving elite captives or chosen representatives. While not every game ended in sacrifice, many were part of larger religious festivals where the losing side, or occasionally the winning, might be offered to the gods. Death on the ball court was not defeat. It was elevation, a transformation into divine offering. Players became heroes in the sacred stories they reenacted. Spectators packed into tiered platforms, draped in dyed cotton, feather cloaks, and jade jewelry. The air buzzed with excitement, but beneath the cheering was a hum of reverence. This was not mere entertainment. It was spiritual theater. Players trained for years, and their bodies were honed to withstand brutal collisions and relentless pace. Music often accompanied the matches. Drums, flutes, and conch shells that mimicked the rhythm of battle or the pulse of the gods. As the ball echoed off ancient stone, it reverberated through both space and belief. Ball courts were built into the hearts of many Maya cities. From Copan to Chichen Itza, their orientations were not random. Many aligned with solstices or key celestial points. The architecture funneled sound and light in specific ways, enhancing the dramatic effect. Some courts were flanked by carved panels depicting players in dynamic motion or scenes of sacrifice and resurrection. These weren't just athletic arenas. They were cosmological gateways where players reenacted battles fought among the stars and deep within the underworld. Even today, the echoes of Paktapak still resonate. In some Maya communities, modern versions of the game are played, not to honor the gods, but to honor the past. On the same soil where players once leapt toward divinity, children now chase rubber balls with laughter. The sacred may have shifted, but the rhythm remains. In the hush of the jungle, if you listen carefully, you might still hear the thud of a ball, the beat of drums, and the breath of gods watching the game unfold. While the grand cities and towering pyramids of the Maya often steal the spotlight, their society thrived because of the people who filled its homes, fields, and workshops. Daily life for most Maya was rooted not in palaces, but in humble family compounds. These homes, typically built with wooden posts, thatched roofs, and plaster walls, were clustered around small courtyards. Here, multi-generational families cooked over open fires, ground maize on stone metates, and passed down songs, stories, and knowledge. Community and continuity were the foundation stones of Maya resilience. Agriculture sustained life, and the day revolved around its rhythm. Men tilled the milpa fields, women tended garden plots, and children helped gather firewood or herd turkeys. Corn was sacred, the lifeblood of Maya identity, and featured in nearly every meal, from tortillas to tamales. Meals were communal and simple. Beans, squash, chili, honey, and cacao formed the staples. Yet, these meals were more than sustenance. They were acts of spiritual gratitude. Before eating, offerings were sometimes made to the gods, thanking them for the harvest and life itself. Maya artisans elevated everyday life with exceptional craftsmanship. Pottery was shaped and painted with care, depicting myths, rituals, and daily scenes. Weavers used cotton and agave fibers dyed with indigo, cochineal, and plant-based pigments to create tunics and ceremonial garments. Jade, obsidian, and shell were shaped into jewelry and tools, while feathers were arranged into elaborate headdresses. These works were not merely decorative. They carried social and spiritual meaning. Even the humblest object could hold a connection to ancestors, gods, or the natural world. Education took place by example. Children learned from their elders. Boys followed fathers into the fields or workshops. Girls learned domestic and artistic skills from mothers and grandmothers. Storytelling played a vital role. The Popol Vuh and other mythic cycles were not just bedtime tales. They were instruction manuals for life. Through stories, children absorbed moral lessons, cosmology, and cultural identity. Ritual games, symbolic drawing, and stargazing were woven into their upbringing, gently preparing them for the responsibilities of adulthood. Though centuries have passed, Echoes of Maya daily life still linger. In villages across Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico, traditional homes are built the same way. Maize is honored, and the old stories are whispered on cool evenings. The people who once tended the fires and fields of great cities may be unrecorded in stone, but their spirit endures in language and food and in the rhythm of everyday life that beats steadily beneath the forest canopy. Trade was the lifeblood that connected the far-flung cities of the Maya world, weaving together coastal ports, highland farms, and deep jungle metropolises into a vast and intricate network. Goods, ideas, and people move along jungle paths, river routes, and causeways, often covering hundreds of kilometers. Traders, called palam, were highly respected, sometimes even traveling with armed escorts or under the blessing of merchant gods like Ekchua. Their packs carried not only obsidian blades and cacao beans, but news, language, and ritual knowledge that flowed across the land like a living current. Key trade cities emerged, places like Naranjo, El Perhuaca, and the coastal port of Coba. These cities served as hubs where inland jungle met seabound commerce. Along the Caribbean coast, large canoes loaded with salt, shells, fish, and cotton threaded through mangroves and turquoise bays. Inland cities traded maize, feathers, jade, and ceramics. Maya traders operated on a barter economy, using cacao beans as currency and polished jade as symbols of elite exchange. Trade wasn't simply economic, it was political. Alliances were made and tested through gifts and tribute, and entire dynasties rose or fell based on their access to trade routes. Markets were central to Maya cities, bustling places filled with sound, scent, and color. Women sold woven textiles dyed in hues of indigo and cochineal. Farmers displayed beans and fruit in woven baskets. Artisans traded pottery, obsidian tools, and animal pelts. These markets were also centers of communication, where travelers shared news of distant cities, omens, and royal marriages. Often held in open plazas, markets served as both economic engines and social crossroads. The Maya were not isolated pockets of stone. They were deeply interconnected, alive with movement and mutual exchange. Trade also carried religion. Traveling merchants visited shrines to offer thanks for safe passage or success. Some trade routes became pilgrimage roads, dotted with altars and sacred caves. Artifacts found in distant locations, Teotihuacan ceramics in Petén or Maya jade in central Mexico, show how wide their network stretched. These exchanges weren't just material, they were spiritual. Ideas traveled with goods, and gods followed their worshippers. Trade was a ritual act as much as a practical one, tying people together across language and distance. As archaeologists uncover buried goods and trade centers, the scale of Maya commerce becomes ever clearer. Their networks rivaled those of ancient Rome or China, not in paved roads, but in perseverance and sacred purpose. In the quiet corridors of forests today, you can still walk where ancient feet once trod, guided by star and stone, moving goods that carried not just wealth, but the soul of a civilization. Beneath the jungle canopy, where roots twist like serpents and vines hang heavy with mist, the Maya believe an invisible world mirrored their own. This was Zabalba, the underworld, a sacred and perilous realm inhabited by gods, spirits, and ancestors. Far from a place of damnation, Zabalba was part of the great cycle of life, death, and rebirth. To the Maya, death did not mean an end. It was a journey, a return, and for some, a transformation. Burial practices, sacred caves, and even city layouts reflected this cosmic balance between the surface world and the deep, unseen world below. Caves held profound spiritual significance. They were seen as portals to Zabalba, wombs of the earth where gods dwelled and where rain, crops, and souls emerged. Maya priests and shamans conducted ceremonies deep within these caverns, lighting torches, offering blood and jade, and calling on spirits for guidance. Stalactites and echoing chambers became temples of natural design. In sacred caves like Naj Tunik and Acton Tunikil Mugnal, the walls still bear painted glyphs and soot from fires long extinguished, and the remains of offerings, ceramic vessels, human bones, lie where they were placed centuries ago. Maya tombs also reflected the journey into the underworld. Rulers were often buried beneath temple platforms or within pyramids, surrounded by goods for the afterlife. Jade jewelry, obsidian blades, conch shells, and painted ceramics. The dead were laid in specific postures, sometimes with their faces covered in jade masks and their mouths holding green stones to symbolize breath and spirit. Murals inside tombs often depicted the soul's journey, gods of death and rebirth, and cosmic trees connecting the heavens to the earth and underworld. These weren't graves. They were passageways to eternity. The Popol Vuh, the great Maya creation epic, tells of the hero twins descent into Xibalba to face death lords through trials of fire, darkness, and deception. Their eventual triumph symbolized the sun's rebirth and Mesa's resurrection each year. This myth shaped everything from calendrical rituals to royal lineage claims. Kings likened themselves to the hero twins, bringers of balance and renewal. By staging public rituals of sacrifice or descent into sacred spaces, they reinforced their divine connection and ensured cosmic harmony. Today, the Maya underworld remains a living belief for many indigenous communities. Sacred caves are still visited, offerings are still made, and death is not feared, but understood as part of the sacred continuum. The jungle still hides the entrances to Xibalba, and if you pause beneath the saber trees, those cosmic world trees that bridge all realms, you might feel the breath of the ancestors rising from the stones below, whispering stories older than time. Among the many marvels of Maya civilization, few are as astonishing or as quietly beautiful as their knowledge of the cosmos. Long before telescopes or modern astronomy, the Maya charted the movements of the sun, moon, Venus, and countless stars with astonishing accuracy. They built observatories, designed ceremonial calendars, and aligned temples with celestial events. For them, astronomy was not merely scientific. It was spiritual. The sky was a divine clock, its patterns woven into agriculture, politics, and prophecy. To gaze upward was to hear the voices of the gods. Central to Maya cosmology was a long count calendar, which tracked vast cycles of time stretching back to their mythic beginning in 3114 BCE. Time was cyclical, not linear. Each Bacton, a period of roughly 394 years, represented a cosmic age. Their famed 2012 date wasn't a prediction of doom. It was the end of a cycle and the start of another. The Maya understood that just as the sun sets and returns, so too does time reset. The world renews itself again and again, like maize sprouting after the rain. Venus held particular importance. Known as a morning star and evening star, its appearances were tracked in codices with precision. The Maya associated Venus with war and divine cycles, often timing rituals and battles to its position in the sky. At cities like Uxmal and Chichen Itza, buildings were oriented to align with Venus's path. These alignments weren't random. They were sacred choreography. When Venus reappeared after a long absence, it was a sign from the gods, a celestial signal to act or wait. Eclipses were moments of great power and fear. The Maya believed they represented celestial struggles, gods momentarily devoured by darkness. Priests read omens in these shadows and conducted rituals to protect the people. Observatories like those at Köppen and Karakol had features aligned to solar solstices and lunar cycles, enabling priests to predict and prepare. Watching the stars wasn't just about curiosity, it was about survival. The heavens warned, blessed, and taught, and the Maya listened with reverence and awe. Today, modern astronomers marvel at Maya calculations, some within seconds of modern predictions, and indigenous astronomers continue to reclaim these traditions. Ancient sky watchers once read the heavens from stone platforms. Now, their descendants track planets through new tools but the same reverence. Beneath the stars, the forest remains their observatory, and the same constellations whisper their ageless truths. As the jungle sleeps and stars return, so too does the ancient wisdom they still carry. Maya cities were not simply clusters of buildings. They were living expressions of cosmic harmony. Every temple, plaza, and causeway was placed with intention, aligned to stars, solstices, and sacred geography. The layout of a city mirrored their worldview. The heavens above, the mortal realm at the center, and the underworld below. The heart of a city was often a great pyramid, representing the sacred mountain where gods descended. From these high points, rulers spoke to both the people and the divine, bridging realms in stone and ceremony. Temples were built not only for grandeur, but for alignment. The Temple of Kukulkan at Chichen Itza, for example, is famous for the serpent shadow that slithers down its steps during equinoxes, an illusion crafted by light and stone. In other cities, temples were aligned with Venus's cycles or sunrise on solstice mornings. These alignments weren't for spectacle. They were calendars in stone, guiding planting, rituals, and royal decisions. Architecture became a conversation with the cosmos. where each angle and shadow carried sacred meaning. Palaces, too, reflected cosmic principles. Long, open rooms with carved lintels and friezes depicted rulers seated as gods, surrounded by scenes of myth and history. Plazas were framed by stelae, stone slabs inscribed with glyphs that marked royal births, victories, and rituals. Ball courts connected physical action to celestial balance, and sacred roads called sakpiab stretched in perfectly straight lines, some leading to neighboring cities, others perhaps to symbolic destinations beyond the material world. These pathways reflected not just travel, but intention, each step aligned with memory and meaning. What's striking about Maya urban design is how seamlessly it blended with the environment. Cities emerged from the forest without conquering it. Canals flowed like rivers through plazas. Terraces hugged the contours of hills. Trees were left standing amid buildings, offering shade and shelter. The Maya knew the land breathed and held memory, and their cities were designed to honor that breath. The stone wasn't imposed upon nature. It was coaxed from it, shaped with humility and reverence. Even in ruin, the geometry of the Maya cities persists. From satellite images, we now see what ancient eyes knew: lines, circles, and alignments that mimic the stars. In the hush of a rainforest clearing, where a stone step catches the morning sun just right, we glimpse a fragment of a design older than memory. The jungle may have hidden these cities for centuries, but their architecture still sings softly to the sky, waiting for the stars to answer. As the classic period reached its zenith around 750 CE, Maya civilization glowed with brilliance. Cities thrived, trade routes pulsed with activity, and rulers erected stone monuments proclaiming divine right and lineage. But by the end of the 9th century, many of these great cities were mysteriously abandoned. Temples stood silent, stelae ceased being carved, and jungle began its quiet reclamation. This collapse wasn't marked by a single cataclysmic event, but rather a complex unraveling, one that still puzzles archaeologists and haunts the forest with questions unanswered. Environmental factors likely played a significant role. Studies of lake sediments and tree rings point to a series of intense droughts striking the Maya lowlands. These dry periods, lasting decades, would have devastated agriculture, particularly maize crops that were central to survival and culture. Deforestation, driven by growing populations and temple construction, may have worsened the crisis by disrupting rainfall patterns. As rivers slowed and fields withered, hunger and desperation set in. The gods, once placated with ritual, may have seemed suddenly silent. Political instability added further strain. As city-states grew more competitive, warfare escalated. Alliances fractured, rulers were overthrown, and resources were diverted toward military conquest instead of sustainable development. Stelae from this period often record victory and bloodshed rather than divine favor and prosperity. Elites may have lost credibility as famine and conflict spread, undermining the very divine authority upon which their rule depended. Without the sacred order, chaos crept in, not in one place, but across the entire southern lowland region. Despite the collapse of many great cities, the Maya people did not vanish. Populations migrated north to the Yucatan Peninsula, where cities like Chichen Itza and Uxmal would later flourish. In smaller settlements and rural communities, Maya traditions endured. Language, crafts, cosmology, and ceremony continued without interruption. While some rituals adapted to new contexts, others remained unchanged. The spiritual core of Maya life outlived the fall of stone walls. What fell was the political structure, not the soul of the civilization. Today, the collapse of the classic Maya is a reminder of how fragile greatness can be when pushed against the forces of nature and internal discord. But it's also a story of survival and rebirth. Beneath layers of earth and vines, the Maya never truly disappeared. They changed, adapted, and persisted. And as modern eyes rediscover their abandoned cities, the stones speak again, not of ruin, but of resilience. While the southern lowlands fell silent, the Maya story continued in the north. Cities like Chichen Itza, Uxmal, and later Mayapan rose to prominence in the Yucatan Peninsula, creating a new chapter of cultural and architectural innovation. These cities carried forward traditions of stelae, temples, and ceremonial life, but also reflected change, new influences, perhaps from distant trading partners or internal shifts in belief and leadership. In this post-classic period, Maya civilization entered a vibrant phase of reinvention rather than retreat. Chichen Itza became a powerful metropolis, blending traditional Maya designs with Toltec influences from central Mexico. Here, Warriors and jaguar imagery decorated the architecture. Temples like the Temple of the Warriors and the group of 1,000 columns revealed a society steeped in ritual and display, yet responsive to external currents. The sacred cenote, where offerings and sacrifices were made to rain gods, remains one of the most iconic spiritual sites of the Maya world. Gold, jade, obsidian, and even human remains have been recovered from its depths, bearing witness to its sacred role. Uxmal, by contrast, rose in elegant harmony with the land. Its buildings, like the Pyramid of the Magician and the Nunnery Quadrangle, display curved lines, decorative latticework, and complex facades of stone masks and glyphs. These cities shifted somewhat from the classic model of divine kingship toward more collective and possibly council-based governance. The political structures evolved, but the cosmological foundations remained. Temples still rose toward the stars, and plazas still echoed with rituals passed down through centuries. By the 1200s, Mayapan became the final great capital of the Maya world. Surrounded by protective walls and political intrigue, it was both vibrant and volatile. Conflicts between noble families, shifting trade alliances, and social unrest marked its later years. Around 1450, Mayapan fell, ending centralized Maya rule. But once again, the fall of a capital didn't mean the fall of the people. Towns and villages continued, preserving language, dress, agricultural knowledge, and sacred rites through oral traditions and seasonal rituals. The post-classic period demonstrates the Maya capacity for transformation. They were never frozen in time or culture. They adapted, traded, borrowed, and invented anew. Whether through Toltec influence, political experimentation, or evolving spiritual practices, they remained deeply rooted in the rhythms of sky, stone, and story. The Maya world was not one of endings. It was a pattern of cycles, and each new city rose not from the ashes of the last, but from the wisdom it left behind. When the Spanish arrived in the 16th century, they did not encounter ruins. They met living Maya kingdoms. Cities like Tyasul and Najbatan still thrived, ruled by kings and sustained by vibrant communities. The Maya had not vanished. They had simply shifted. Yet the Spanish conquest brought unimaginable upheaval, disease, violence, and the systematic dismantling of a civilization. Temples were toppled, codices burned, and entire cities depopulated. Despite this devastation, the Maya resisted through battle, through migration, and through quiet acts of cultural preservation that would echo for centuries. The destruction of Maya books, written on bark paper and filled with astronomical records, rituals, and histories, was a tragic blow. Only 4 codices survive today. Spanish friars, seeking to replace Maya cosmology with Christian doctrine, burned these texts as heretical. But some priests, like Diego de Landa, paradoxically tried to record the very traditions they sought to erase. His relation to Las Cosas de Yucatan preserved parts of the Maya script, albeit through a colonial lens. Even in erasure, fragments endured. Many Maya communities fled deeper into the forest or the highlands, preserving their traditions in secrecy. They continue to speak their languages, honor their gods beneath the guise of saints, and maintain sacred calendars passed orally through generations. Holy caves still received offerings. Ceremonies adapted, blending Christian and Maya symbols, but their essence remained. The jungle once again became sanctuary. In the silence beneath saber trees, the old stories were kept alive, whispered in rhythm with the seasons. Rebellion became part of Maya history, too. From the 17th century resistance in Petén to the 19th century caste war in Yucatan, the Maya fought back against oppression. Entire towns resisted colonial taxes, land seizures, and forced conversions. Some established independent Maya states, ruled by spiritual leaders and guarded by prophecy. The white city of Chan Santa Cruz became a symbol of Maya defiance, its faith blending Catholic imagery with ancient beliefs. The forest remained both refuge and battleground, echoing with the footsteps of those who refuse to forget. Despite centuries of colonization, the Maya endure, not as relics, but as people. Today, over 6 million Maya live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. They farm maize, speak ancestral tongues, perform ceremonies, and pass on stories rooted in stars and stone. The temples may have fallen, but the worldview remains intact. The forest remembers. And so do they. In the quiet recesses of the Guatemalan highlands and Yucatan villages, the Maya calendar still marks time. Elders gather at sunrise to read the sacred Kolkij or Tzolk'in, divining the energy of the day and guiding decisions for their communities. Each day holds a spirit, a number, a meaning. Births are interpreted through this cosmic lens, as are marriages, journeys, and harvests. Though the classic cities fell centuries ago, their calendars still pulse, living threads that bind the ancient and the modern. Language is another enduring legacy. From Kitsch to Yucatec, over 30 Maya languages are still spoken today. These languages carry more than communication. They encode worldview, identity, and ritual. Words describe not just things, but relationships between people and ancestors, between humans and corn, between land and sky. In oral storytelling, the Maya cosmos is alive. Myths from the Popol Vuh, the hero twins, the birth of the sun, the sacred maze, are still shared around fires, under stars, exactly where they began. Art, too, remained a powerful form of cultural continuity. Maya weavers create textiles that echo ancient glyphs and cosmological patterns. Each color, thread, and motif has meaning: lightning, rain, animals, gods. Pottery continues to be shaped and painted with sacred forms. In communities like San Juan, La Laguna, or Zinacanton, murals depict not only local stories, but ancient heritage. Through art, the old cities breathe again, not as ruins, but as inspiration carried in cloth, clay, and brush. Maya ceremonies are still performed at sacred sites. Smoke from copal resin curls into the air. Offerings of corn, candles, chocolate, and flowers are arranged on circular altars that echo the cycles of time. Prayers are sung to the heart of the sky and heart of the earth. These ceremonies are not reenactments. They are real, continuous, vital. The gods still walk among the saber trees, and the ancestors are not gone. They are simply nearby, listening in the wind, watching in the stars. Education and revival efforts grow stronger each year. Maya youth are learning to read glyphs, rediscover sacred texts, and reclaim spiritual leadership. Schools teach in Maya languages. Elders pass down chants, dances, and agricultural rites. Archaeologists now work with indigenous communities as partners, not just observers. The Maya aren't a mystery to be solved. They are people with memory, agency, and a future. And their story, like their calendar, is a circle. It continues, alive, aware, and endlessly renewing. In the modern world, ancient Maya cities are no longer lost. They're being rediscovered and reinterpreted every day. Archaeologists using LiDAR, light detection and ranging technology, have revealed sprawling networks of roads, terraces, and hidden structures beneath dense jungle canopies. These findings have transformed our understanding of Maya civilization, showing it was even more vast, interconnected, and sophisticated than previously believed. Cities once thought isolated were part of an expansive world, dense with trade, politics, and spiritual life. These discoveries often begin not with bulldozers, but with whispers, an elder's memory, a farmer's find, or a curious hill that turns out to be a temple in disguise. As technology advances, the jungle yields its secrets more gently. Yet what's most powerful is how these rediscoveries resonate with the living Maya. Elders recognize places from old stories. Rituals return to long-forgotten plazas. The past is not merely uncovered. It is reawakened, step by step, breath by breath. Some ancient sites are now protected parks, carefully preserved and respectfully explored. Visitors walk among the same stones once touched by kings and priests. Temples rise above tree lines. Howler monkeys call in the distance, and carved stelae stand weathered but proud. Interpretive signs share history. But the most meaningful guides are the descendants themselves, Maya stewards who tell stories not just a stone, but a spirit. In their voices, the past isn't an exhibit. It's a living world. Not all rediscovered cities are celebrated. Many remain hidden due to environmental concerns or spiritual reasons. Some are considered too sacred for excavation. Others lie in protected biospheres, where jaguars roam and ancient spirits are thought to linger. Maya spiritual leaders often bless sites before research begins, seeking harmony between memory and curiosity. In this way, archaeology becomes not just science, but ceremony, a respectful dialogue between the modern world and the ancestral one. The jungle keeps many secrets. Some may never be fully known, but with each discovery, each glyph deciphered, and each voice reclaimed, the story grows deeper. The Maya never truly vanished. They simply waited. In the rustle of leaves over stone, in the scent of copal on warm air, in the rhythm of drums at sunrise, the past speaks. And today, we are finally learning to listen. In recent decades, Maya voices have taken center stage in reclaiming their own story. No longer filtered solely through foreign scholars or colonial records, Maya historians, linguists, and artists are reshaping how their culture is understood and shared. Universities in Guatemala and Mexico offer degrees in Maya studies taught by Maya professors. Community-run museums in towns like Coban and Oxcutscab feature exhibits curated in native languages, not just Spanish or English. Knowledge is coming home, and from it, pride and renewal bloom. Festivals and holidays offer vibrant spaces for this cultural reawakening. During the Day of the Dead or Hanal Pixen in Yucatan, families create elaborate altars with food, flowers, candles, and photos of loved ones. But beneath the layers of Christian influence lies an older rhythm, a continuity of ancestor veneration stretching back to the classic period. Traditional music, marimba and flute, dances that mimic animals or celestial cycles, and foods like tamales or to all trace their roots to ancient kitchens and sacred feasts. Youth are embracing this legacy in creative ways. Maya rappers perform in their native tongues, blending hip-hop with ancestral stories. Digital artists recreate mythological scenes with vibrant symbolism. Activists campaign for land rights using both historical maps and oral traditions as legal testimony. Through new media, ancient symbols travel far beyond the forest, shared on phones, broadcast through radio, reaching diasporas and inspiring global curiosity. This fusion of ancient and modern is not a contradiction. It's the Maya way, adaptation with integrity. Spiritual traditions also thrive in this resurgence. Sacred fires are once again lit on mountaintops. Shamans, or Ajkaijab, guide ceremonies timed to ancient calendars. The sacred ceiba tree is planted near schools and community centers as a living link to the cosmos. Healing practices that use native herbs, steam baths, and chants are being preserved and taught across generations. Each ritual, large or small, speaks a connection, not only to the god, but to the land, the past, and the unborn future. The legacy of the Maya is not confined to ruins or museum glass. It lives in language, in song, in the hands of farmers planting maize as their ancestors did. It lives in the stargazer, the storyteller, the dancer, and the child repeating old proverbs beneath the moon. The jungle once tried to hide their cities, but it could never silence their spirit. That spirit is rising now, not as memory, but as presence. As the rainforest reclaims its secrets and ancient stones rest beneath layers of moss and mist, the story of the Maya continues. Not in silence, but in quiet continuity. To walk through a ruined city is not to enter a grave, but to step into a place still breathing with memory. Every tree root weaving through a temple, every jaguar paw print in the mud, every echo beneath a core-built arch is a whisper of life. These cities were not abandoned. They were handed back to the earth, who kept them safe. For many, the Maya world seems far away, an exotic past wrapped in mystery. But when we pause to listen, we realize it's still here, in hum of bees around a milpa, in the cadence of spoken kitsch. In a mother weaving patterns her great-grandmother once wove, the pulse of a civilization endures. It asks not to be admired like a relic, but to be acknowledged as a living legacy. The jungle did not bury the Maya. It guarded their memory until we were ready to see again. Tourism has brought both light and shadow to these forgotten cities. On one hand, it funds preservation, fosters interest, and bridges cultures. On the other, it can commodify sacred spaces, turn mystery into spectacle. But many Maya communities are now reclaiming the narrative, leading tours, offering ceremonies, and ensuring visitors understand that these places are not just historical sites, but ancestral homes. With reverence, it is possible to walk these paths with humility, not just curiosity. What began as a story of conquest and collapse becomes, in truth, a story of endurance. Few civilizations have shaped the land and stars as the Maya did. Fewer still have survived so much erasure with such grace. In every glyph still deciphered, every terror still cultivated, every sacred fire still lit, the Maya remind us that history is not a line. It is a spiral, and they have never stopped walking it. So if you ever find yourself standing in the shadow of a ruined temple, breathe deeply. Listen not just with ears, but with heart. The wind in the leaves, the calls of night birds, the hush between footsteps. They are not empty sounds. They are voices. The rainforest remembers. The stones remember. And now, perhaps, so do we.